Welcome to Senior Living Visionaries, a podcast for senior living leaders who are looking to stay ahead of the curve in the industry. On this show, we feature leaders and innovators in senior living who are pushing the boundaries and creating new, effective services and solutions. And now, let's settle in as host Jennifer Drago connects us with today's guests.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever left a board meeting feeling like you just checked off every item on the agenda, but that you really didn't tackle the questions that are going to shape the future of the organization? That's where generative discussions come in. And I'm going to go into detail today about what generative discussions are, why they lead to a more engaged strategic board, and how they differ from operation or fiduciary type discussions. Thanks so much for being here for Senior Living Visionaries, a podcast where we showcase the leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of senior living. We also talk a lot about great governance because building a brilliant board will be a competitive advantage for your organization from now well into the future. So we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to have the best board practices in place as possible. So let's talk about what is a generative discussion. It's a mode of board engagement, board discussion that explores deeper questions, sometimes out of the box or a little bit off the wall questions that helps us to foster our strategic insight, and it helps to fuel innovation of the organization. So it's a discussion that takes place usually in the span of about 20 minutes with a predetermined question that is sent out in advance. And the purpose of the discussion is truly free brainstorming around the topic. The purpose is not to come out with a decision. Although you may have such a great discussion, you may say, gosh, we have to explore this further. And we may assign that either to a board member or a staff member for some follow-up so that we can come back to that discussion at some point in the future. But sometimes they don't lead to any outcome. So they're just simply for the purpose of exploring some innovation or out-of-the-box thinking. I want to remind you that there's kind of three different modes of governance thinking, if you will. The first is fiduciary, from an oversight perspective. Some of the oversight is fiduciary in nature, but sometimes it can be around compliance or risk management or legal issues or ethical issues. It's oversight in general. Then we have our strategic discussion, so setting the strategic direction for the organization, putting your strategic plan together, monitoring that strategic plan and how we're executing on those goals. And then the third is generative, where we're exploring possibilities and identifying emerging trends. Maybe we're talking about something that's happening in a shoulder industry or a side-by-side industry to see if it has any bearing on our current industry, for example. Why is this important? Well, according to BoardSource, generative governance provides an opportunity for boards to deepen their analysis and focus on more abstract concepts in order to be better informed decision makers and be better able to adapt to a changing environment. And so that was from BoardSource. So instead of just improving a budget, a generative discussion might explore, how will our revenue model need to shift over the next 5 years? Do we need to diversify our income? How will we do that? What products could we sell that we're not selling currently? Will our funding change, especially if we're heavily reliant on donations, which can shift year to year and depending on the economy, or we're reliant on grants and grants from federal, state organizations, or even from grant-making organizations? So that's an example of generative governance and how it can kind of shift your thinking, your decision making. So why do we use generative discussions? Well, there's quite a few great reasons why. First, they encourage our big picture thinking, moves us beyond our day-to-day operational role where we're kind of in a tunnel and we're thinking about the work that we have to do. It gives us an opportunity to think bigger. And you might say, well, when we have a strategic planning day, we do that. But how often are you truly engaging in strategic planning? It's probably only every 2 years, 3 years, some organization 5 years. And so having generative discussions on a regular basis keeps those wheels turning, keeps that strategy moving forward, and can really propel the organization forward. It helps improve our decision making because we can see the context and the solutions all in one. And so we're constantly thinking about how our environment is shifting so that we can make better decisions when it comes to those operational decisions. They boost engagement because everybody is expected to participate. We're going to talk about how these discussions actually work in practice. But every single board member is expected to contribute to these discussions, which makes every board member feel more valued and involved and that they're having an impact on the organization. They help us anticipate future challenges because we're in, putting into place those forward thinking processes and strategies. We're going to better anticipate what's coming before us. So, Peter Block, who's an author and speaker on organizational development, says each gathering needs to become an example of the future we want to create, right? So, what do we all want to do? We want to be responding to our environment and thinking ahead. A recent case study exploring board learning found that boards often report poor or uneven member engagement, no shocker there, and insufficient time for meaningful dialogue. So, this make sure that we set aside time for meaningful dialogue and again increases the engagement of your board members. So let's talk about how we implement generative discussions. So the generative discussions are really set forth by your board chair, sometimes in concert with your CEO of your executive director. A generative question is going to be selected and put on the agenda ahead of time. So board members know what question they need to start thinking about, and they're going to give it some thoughtful time, maybe write down their answers. And then we're going to allow about 20 minutes during a board meeting to really have time for this discussion. So it's time limited, but yet it's open ended. And we want every board member to contribute to the discussion. So it's important that we take time to hear from everyone. And again, there may not be an outcome to the discussion, it might just be a brainstorming session, but I guarantee you're going to come up with some pretty amazing ideas out of these generative discussions. The questions themselves need to be thought provoking. I'm going to give you some examples in just a second, but we really want to frame discussions around future oriented issues or shifts that are happening in our sector, in our environment, in our demographics. We want to make sure that everything feels like a safe environment. So we need that psychological safety so that nobody feels like they're going to say something stupid or they're going to say the wrong thing. So we have to make sure that we are very open to everybody's input without judgment. We want to capture insights and action items. So we want to take some notes about all the great ideas that we're going to hear. So generally the best place to do this, in my opinion, to have these generative discussions is around the middle of the board meeting. So in the first half to the mid section of the board meeting, you don't want to leave it to the end because sometimes our board meetings run long. It'll be easy to say, oh, we're not going to have time for that. We're going to do it next time. Or our energy may wane by the end of the meeting. So let's do it in the middle of the board meeting. And in another episode of Senior Living Visionaries, I talked about effective board meeting agendas and formats and talked about putting the strategic work of the organization up front, generative discussions in the middle, and then your operational reporting, your financials, your metrics, your dashboards, your CEO report, your committee reports in the operational section. So remember to try to keep it in the first half to middle of the agenda so that everybody has energy and attention. So let's talk about some sample generative questions. If you're a senior living organization, you might ask about shifting demographics. So how will our shifting demographics, the next generation, so right now in senior living, we're talking a lot about the boomers who are our current customers are differing from our prior generation of customers and how their needs are different. We might actually take that to the next level and say, okay, beyond the boomers, or maybe serving the younger boomers, what are their needs going to be? And what are their desires and impacts going to be? With COVID, fewer people want to move into senior living organizations, although I think that's starting to turn around, but definitely on the care side. So memory care was impacted in terms of occupancy. for a long time, even assisted living and definitely nursing home care or skilled nursing care. And so we might talk about how those trends might continue or might change over time with different demographics. If senior living became obsolete, especially the care side of things, what would replace it? What can we evolve beyond real estate into a true longevity partner? So, what partnerships could we put into place that might positively impact our residents and our future residents? For nonprofit organizations, you could look at different questions around mission and mission impact. What would our mission look like if we started fresh today? What would we be doing? What would our mission say? And not even taking your current mission off the table. Don't have that in front of folks when you're asking them for feedback of what your mission should be. What trends will impact our clients most in the next decade? If we had to completely reinvent our fundraising strategy, what would it look like? What partnerships could help us expand our impact exponentially? And what's a potential disruptor in our field that we're not yet considering? So, by asking these questions and having these great discussions, you are going to get better decision making, more engaged board members, and you're always going to have this future thinking aspect to your board to where it's going to truly transform your board meetings and the work of the board in terms of setting that strategic direction for your organization. So I really want to encourage you to try these. I actually have a free resource for you that I want to offer to you, and it's around 20 generative questions that your nonprofit board can use during board meetings. And I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but please pick it up because I think you will be able to use it and hopefully implement generative discussion at your next board meeting. So the best boards don't just make decisions, they explore the possibilities that truly shape the future. Generative questions can help you do that at every single board meeting. The next time you're in a board meeting, push beyond the agenda and make sure that you're asking a truly game-changing question. I want to thank you for being here today. You've been listening to Senior Living Visionaries, a podcast featuring the innovators and thought leaders in senior living, as well as best practices in governance to help make your organization the best that it can be. Please subscribe to be notified of new episodes of this podcast at seniorlivingvisionaries.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Senior Living Visionaries podcast and radio show, where we showcase the leaders and innovators in the industry who are pushing the boundaries and setting the stage for the future in senior living and services. Join us next time as we share the bold ideas and breakthroughs of the industry's most forward-thinking leaders here on Senior Living Visionaries.